All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about the Battle of Loos, one of the biggest British offensives of 1915. And what a story it is. It's a story of huge ambition, brand new, terrifying technology, and, well, in the end, a complete and utter disaster. This was a battle that was supposed to change everything, but instead, it became one of the war's most brutal lessons.
And this quote, this just says it all, doesn't it? It's from an officer who was actually there, on the ground. He's not just talking about losing, he's talking about having victory right there, in your grasp, and then watching it slip away. That's the tragic irony we need to keep in mind as we go through what happened.
So, to really get why Loos even happened, you first have to understand the massive problem it was trying to solve. By 1915, the Western Front wasn't really a battlefield anymore. It was just this static, bloody deadlock. Hundreds of miles of trenches, mud, and barbed wire that nobody could seem to break through. I mean, think about it. The war kicks off in 1914, with armies on the move. But that grinds to a halt pretty fast. The first half of 1915 was just a series of incredibly expensive failures. The Allies would throw thousands of men at the German lines, and nothing. By the fall, the commanders were getting desperate. They felt they had to do something massive, something different to finally break this thing open. And the big idea, the ultimate goal, was actually pretty simple. All they wanted to do was punch a hole, a real, clean hole right through the German defenses. Get the soldiers out of the trenches, out of the mud, and back onto open ground. You know, a war of movement where skill and speed could win the day again. So how are they going to do it? Well, this is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, pretty terrifying. The British decided to gamble on a brand new weapon, something they had previously sworn they'd never use, calling it unsporting. For the very first time, they were going to unleash poison gas. And this stuff, chlorine gas, was just brutal. See, it's heavier than air. The whole idea was that it would just seep down into the German trenches and dugouts, all the places artillery shells couldn't reach. It was designed to force the German soldiers to either suffocate or scramble out into the open, choking and blinded, right into the path of the waiting British infantry. Okay, so here's the plan. It's 4 steps. You line up over 5,000 steel cylinders of this gas, you release 140 tons of it, you attack. Simple enough, right? But look at step 2. Wait for a favorable wind. The success of the entire operation, the lives of tens of thousands of men, literally depended on which way the wind was blowing. A huge, uncontrollable variable. And here's the kicker. The guys on the ground, the Royal Engineers who were actually in charge of these gas cylinders, they knew it was a bad idea. They warned high command, hey, the wind isn't strong enough, it's not reliable. But they were overruled. The order came down, the attack goes ahead. You can just feel the disaster brewing, can't you?
Right, let's get to the day itself, September 25th, 1915. Because what unfolds is this incredible mix of, on the one hand, spectacular success, and on the other, absolute self-inflicted horror. The battlefield just descends into total chaos.
It's really a tale of 2 completely different battles happening at the same time. In one area, the gas works perfectly. The 15th Scottish Division charges forward. They capture the village of Loos. They even get onto the critical high ground of Hill 70. It was an absolutely stunning breakthrough. But just down the line, the engineers' worst fears came true. The wind faltered, it shifted, and that deadly green cloud just drifted right back into the British trenches, gassing their own men. And this is the critical question of the whole battle. A real breakthrough had actually happened. A gap was torn open in the German lines. The objective was right there for the taking. But the fresh troops, the reserves that were supposed to pour through that gap and seal the victory, they were nowhere to be found. So what happened? Where were they? This timeline tells the whole tragic story. It's a catastrophic failure of command. See, that window of opportunity, it was really only open for a couple of hours in the morning. But the reserve divisions, full of new soldiers, had been held miles and miles behind the lines. Orders didn't even get to them until after 1 in the afternoon. By the time they marched for hours and finally got to the front, it was almost dark. They were exhausted, confused, and the moment was just gone. The Germans had already plugged the gap. So the great breakthrough had failed. The Germans rushed in their own reinforcements, they counterattacked, and the battle just turned back into that familiar, grim, grinding fight. And what came next was the awful task of counting the cost of that failure. Just look at that number. Nearly 60,000 British casualties.
At the time, it was the highest number of losses the British Army had ever suffered in a single battle. It's a truly staggering figure.
Now, the German defenders, they also suffered terribly, around 26,000 casualties. But when you put these two numbers side by side, the scale of the British disaster becomes incredibly clear.
And this chart just lays it bare. The attackers suffered more than double the casualties of the defenders. It was a brutal, lopsided price to pay for a battle that, in the end, achieved almost nothing of strategic value.
So what was the final tally? Well, Loos was a clear German victory. The stalemate on the Western Front? Totally unbroken. The failure was so bad, it actually led to the commander-in-chief of the entire British Army, Sir John French, being sacked and replaced by Douglas Haig. And perhaps the most heartbreaking legacy of all, over 20,000 of the men who fell there have no known grave. Their names are just carved on a memorial. Which leaves us with this final, haunting question. Was the Battle of Loos just a senseless tragedy, a waste of life? Or was it a painful, but maybe necessary lesson? A lesson in how to manage new technology, how to coordinate reserves, how to fight a modern war. It really brings us right back to what Major General Hilton said at the beginning. The real tragedy wasn't just that it failed, but how incredibly close it came to success.